Hello, and welcome to another helping of a spoonful of history. What you will see here is the Manifest Destiny note guides that you will be completing at home. I will be giving you a blank note guide that looks much like this map, except for it'll be blank, and then off to the sides, like right up in here, over in here, and down in Florida, Louisiana Purchase, Texas, etc. There'll be places that you will need to fill in the notes and answer questions which will go along with this lecture. Okay, so if you are ready and you have your note guides out, let's go ahead and get started first. So what I'd like to really talk about today is how America basically became what it is from the original 13 colonies, and as it spread all the way across the west to California to have the lower 48 states, or the 48 contiguous states. So let's start off with the 13 original colonies. So if you can remember back from the beginning of the year, the original 13 colonies were basically set up for a variety of reasons. Some of them were for religious freedoms, like in New England. Others were set up for proprietary colonies for business, such as in Virginia and the Carolinas. But because of problems with the 100 Years' War in Europe, the extension of the 100 Years' War in Europe, England was left with a large war debt, and that extension came over to America in what is called the French and Indian War, where the United States or the American colonies aligned themselves with Great Britain, while some of the French aligned themselves with some of the Indians in the Ohio River Valley, the Mohicans, and others. The Americans and the British do win the war, but at a very high cost. The American colonies are basically asked to pay in taxes to help pay for this war. And the Americans are really kind of upset because of that rallying cry, no taxation without representation. They weren't upset that they had to pay a tax. They were upset that they were not given representation as British citizens, a voice in Parliament, and the ability to basically govern themselves. Remember, our American people are a product of the Enlightenment and model even today, our government on the British. So, one of the first things that escalates is the Proclamation Line of 1763 that begins to really cause problems with the Americans and the British, and that is basically to help Britain stop having to pay so much money, because they're almost bankrupt when it comes to the war, after the war with France. And so the best way to kind of limit how much money, because it costs a lot of money for a war and to provide troops, what happens is they put an artificial line, and let me go back to the map so you can kind of see. They put an artificial line right here down the Appalachian Mountains, okay? And this line is called the Proclamation Line of 1763. And what this does is two things. One, it helps the British not have to foot the bill by sending lots of military people over into the Indian country to help protect American settlers, which would cost a lot of money. But the second big part was it forced American settlers, American colonists, to have to live along the coast where all the ports are, and that's where the British are making a lot of their money, so that those people will have to buy British goods and therefore pay taxes on them and help pay down the war. So, what escalates is a series of repressive taxes, according to the Americans. This will lead to citizen groups forming militias, and eventually the Lexington Common Court in April of 1775, the first battle that will start the American Revolution will happen. And many years later, the Treaty of Paris will end the American Revolution, and basically that area west of the Appalachian Mountains, that Ohio River Valley that Americans so desperately wanted to go to, and the British tried to keep them out with the Proclamation of 1763, by the Treaty of Paris, officially becomes ours. And that's how America will acquire this area of land right in here. As you remember, this area in here pretty much was already the 13 colonies, okay? But this area right here, the Ohio River Valley, will be acquired by the Treaty of Paris. That doesn't mean everything is great, because there are still lots of Native American Indians there that are not happy with Americans settling, as well as the British in the Treaty of Paris said that they would actually leave America, okay, but they don't. They stay on the Great Lakes and build forts, and pretty much the British Navy controls the Great Lakes, which will eventually lead to the War of 1812. Now, when we talk about the second president, John Adams, a lot comes to mind: the Alien and Sedition Acts. He's kind of a pompous guy that has a short temper, very self-centered, but he's actually an incredibly brilliant guy. And one of the big things that happens during the war, during his presidency, is that he wants to stay out of war with France and England, and he desperately tries to stay out of war. That was one of the big reasons why he passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. He did not want to go to war. Well, he is a one-term president, and what happens is that when he leaves the presidency, because he was able to not go to war with France, allows the next president, third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, to basically be able to be in a position to buy this whole piece of land called the Louisiana Territory. Originally in the Louisiana Territory, remember, why did we want to buy it? Well, because of the Mississippi River, right? The Mississippi River flows through that area and out to the Gulf of Mexico. So the Mississippi River flows to the Gulf. And because of all the new land in the Ohio River Valley, it's much easier to ship goods down the river. However, because Spain is having troubles with Mexico, and other parts of, Mexico and other parts of South America, they are going to have to pretty much give up much of their land in North America. And the Louisiana Territory, which was originally part of France, but during the French and Indian War, they leave. They give that land, or what they call cede that land, to Spain. Well, during John Adams' presidency, John Adams had a treaty with Spain, and what it did was allowed America to have what they called a right of deposit, which means they had the ability to use the Louisiana Delta and the Mississippi and the Gulf of Mexico to ship all the goods in the Ohio River Valley. But now that Spain is having trouble with Mexico and other South American countries, guess what's happening? They are going to have to leave their land holdings in the Louisiana Territory. So by treaty, that land goes right back to France. Well, remember, John Adams was able to avoid war with France, so guess what? When Thomas Jefferson feels that, well, maybe France is not going to let us use the port of New Orleans, he's authorized by Congress to go and buy the port of New Orleans, just that small little port. Let me go back here and circle that. This small little port right here, okay? He's authorized to buy that little piece of land for $10 million, okay? For $10 million. However, Napoleon Bonaparte, who is bent on dominating all of Europe at that time, is hard-pressed for money, and he really doesn't have any desire to have this area of land, okay? So what he does is he tells Jefferson, hey, you know what? Why don't you, instead of just buying this piece of land for $10 million, why don't you buy the whole thing for $15 million? And Jefferson, who is a strict constructionist and does not really believe that he has the authority as president to be able to buy that land without permission of Congress, but knows that if he's going to wait for Congress to give him permission, he's going to lose the deal, basically uses the president's treaty-making powers and says, you got yourself a deal, Napoleon. And so what happens is we will buy that whole area of land for $15 million, okay, and which will double the size of America, and it's about 11 cents an acre. So it's one of the best land deals America will ever have. And because of that, he needs to know what he's bought. So he will put together a corps of discovery led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, with Clark's slave York, and a bunch of other mountain men and most experienced survivalists with the aid of Sacagawea, her husband Charbonneau, and their little son Jean Baptiste. They will go and be the first Americans to walk and paddle to the Pacific Ocean, to where is modern-day Astoria, Oregon, where the Goonies were filmed. So that's how we acquired the Ohio River Valley, and that's how we acquired the Louisiana Territory. Now let's talk about how Texas comes to be. So with Texas, it's kind of one of those things. It's the same history, really, that happens in California. Mexico and Spain, actually Spain, welcomes American settlers into Texas because the area of Texas is unsettled. It's dangerous. There's really, the farmland hasn't been developed, and there's a lot of Indian savages that are ready to kill anybody that's not them. So the Spanish welcome the American settlers in and say, hey, we'll give you land grants. In exchange, you need to come in, develop the land, pay taxes, okay, kill the Native Americans like you guys do the best, and basically become Catholic, agree to Spanish laws, pay our taxes, develop our land, do not bring slaves into our country. So Moses, Stephen Austin's father, is the guy who sets up this, and he's called an impresario, okay? And he gets permission. But unfortunately, right when that happens, Mexico will win their independence from Spain, and they have no idea if this deal that they made with Spain is going to go through. So what happens is Moses Austin again goes down to Mexico City, talks with the Mexican government, and they agree that yes, the deal is still on. Just as long as you abide by our laws, don't bring slaves in, and you learn Spanish, become Catholic, and you pay taxes and improve upon the land, you're more than welcome to come in. And this will, unfortunately, Moses will die, and his son, Stephen Austin, which the capital of Texas is named after, will bring them in, and they will settle just outside of Dallas, Texas. So, years go by, and by 1830, Americans will outnumber the Mexicans, or what they call the Tejanos. So what happens is Mexico basically says no more Americans are allowed. You're not abiding by us. You guys have not, you've not converted to Catholicism. You're not following our laws, so no more. But you understand that Mexican authority, Mexican power, really isn't all that much outside of Mexico City. And as it gets, Mexico gets closer and closer to the Rio Grande and crosses the Rio Grande, the power of Mexico is really none. So the Texans knew this. So basically, they will take this and will challenge Mexico, going, if you're going to stop all of our American immigration, then guess what? We are going to declare our independence. And that's exactly what happened. Is that they basically say, you know what? You have no power anyways. Come on, go ahead. Bring it on. We're going to declare and become our own state. And the Texans thought that, you know what, America is going to be behind them. And really, because there was such political division between the Federalists in the New England states that saw this idea, Manifest Destiny, and this idea of the Texas War of Independence as no more than a land grab to expand slavery, Jackson and others really weren't warm and fuzzy to the idea of backing the Texans, so they kind of took a hands-off approach and stepped back to see what happened. Enter the Texas Revolution. So, Santa Anna will send troops to basically quickly put down this rebellion. And so, along the Nueces River, in southern part of Texas is where really the first battle happens, okay? And what goes on is the Americans will quickly retreat, and Davy Crockett and others will basically go up to the Alamo, which is in San Antonio, which was a former mission and now a military fort. And the goal was not to defend the Alamo, but basically to just take the Alamo and get all the weapons and leave. But Davy Crockett and others basically said that we're going to take a stand, and they basically dug in. And when Santa Anna and the Mexican troops showed up to San Antonio, to the Alamo, there was a big fight, okay? Now, what caused the Texans to want to fight? Well, they were promised land. You realize land is super expensive in the East, and there's no money and opportunity in the East, so these people are now promised land. Land equals opportunity, equals promised wealth, equals the American dream, so they're very eager to fight. And they are fierce fighters, and they are going to face the Mexican army in the Alamo. They will hold them off for weeks, but then eventually will be overpowered, and everybody except for a few people, a woman and a child, will actually be executed at the Alamo, including Davy Crockett and Bowie. And this, other than this being a major defeat for the Americans, it actually will become a rallying cry for the Texans, because they will say, remember the Alamo, remember Goliad, which is the next battle that we're going to be talking about, that will cause them to want to stand up and fight and give revenge to the Mexicans who beat them at the Alamo. So this comprehension question is, why did Texans want to be independent from Mexico? Were they A, they wanted to stop immigration from the United States, B, Stephen Austin had become dictator, C, Santa Anna had overthrown the Mexican Constitution, or was it D, all of the above? And if you chose this answer right here, A, you are correct. So the Alamo, like I said, the Alamo, in once upon a time, this right here, bell, was actually added for a John Wayne film. That was not part of the Alamo. Okay, that was added on. And what you see here is sort of the remnants of it, but they're rebuilt. Right over here, if you ever go, this is where they found Davy Crockett executed. And it's actually really, really small. It's a former, like I said, church that was turned into a battle. And the original battleground would have gone way out here, and now there's storefronts here. But it would have been a huge military complex at the time. So what you see at the Alamo now is only but a fraction of what it once was. Okay? So the Alamo, the troops, Santa Anna and about 6,000 of his troops went to basically take the Alamo and hopefully defeat the Texans and want to win. But 160 Texans will hold for 13 days against 6,000 Mexican troops. 160 against 6,000, and they're going to hold for 13 days, which is pretty darn impressive. Santa Anna will kill every single Texan fighter, who even those who gave up. He will spare the life of a woman and a child because he wanted him to go and basically tell everybody what Santa Anna had done. After that, the dead included Davy Bowie, the guy with the big Bowie knife, David Crockett, and William Travis, who was really the captain of the fort, okay? And this is a huge defeat for the Americans, but like I said, will also be a rallying cry, because right after that, the Americans heard about Santa Anna. They rallied to the Texan cause, okay? They gave money, they gave support, and the rallying cry, the motto was "Remember the Alamo." And then eventually what happens is the Battle of San Jacinto, which will be the last battle, Santa Anna will separate himself from the rest of his army, thinking that he would basically go around and flank them. But what happens is he will actually be injured, and underneath a tree, he is forced to basically sign a treaty because he's taken prisoner from Sam Houston. And this treaty will basically say that Texan is now no longer part of Mexico. It is now part of the United States. Years later, basically Santa Anna will say that the independence does not count, that he was forced to sign it against his will, and Mexico never actually recognized Texas independence. Now that's very important to realize, because at the Mexican-American War, that's one of the big things. Texas had been independent in their minds, but Mexico, even though they never challenged the independence, never really saw Texas as independent, but as a state in dispute within the northern Mexican territory. Very, very important. So, the Texas Republic, the Lone Star State, it becomes its own country. It thought very quickly it would become part of the United States, right? It writes a constitution exactly like the United States, except for they will include in their constitution to allow slavery, okay? And they asked to become part of the United States, but Andrew Jackson is like, yeah, I'd love to, but there's too much division here in America. We're not going to do it. And the Federalists, the Northerners, would never let it happen, because remember, that would expand slave territory, slave state, and that would make the slave state of Texas increase the power of the South in the Congress. So, Texas will officially become a state in 1845 when James K. Polk will become president, okay? And we'll just skip these. We'll go back and answer these questions later in class, okay? Now, we've covered Ohio, Louisiana, Texas. Now let's talk about Florida, okay? Now Florida, what happens in Florida? Remember Andrew Jackson, good old Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, without authorization, will go and march his troops, because there were Indians that were basically being paid and given weapons by the Spanish, will be terrorizing American settlers along this border here, okay? And so what happens is Jackson is going to march his troops, across the border, and basically single-handedly take Florida. Now, John Quincy Adams, who is the Secretary of State at the time, wants to court-martial Andrew Jackson. But James Monroe, who's the president, was like, yeah, not so fast. So what he does is he sends John Quincy Adams over to negotiate the Adams-Onis Treaty. Now, what the Adams-Onis Treaty does is it gives America Florida. Then Spain has to give up claims to Oregon Territory. So Spain no longer has claim, right, to the Oregon Territory. And then America is going to give up this little area of land in eastern Texas, and then they're going to officially set the American border at, like, it looks like a little stepping stones here to the Gulf of Mexico. And all of this will become part of the United States. This will become Spain's, and Florida becomes America. And remember, Spain gives up all of the Oregon Territory. So now the territory is only going to be jointly occupied or shared between, in Oregon anyways, between the Oregon Territory, between the United States and Great Britain, which is going to lead to the war, a lot more problems, okay? So, with that said, that's how Florida came to be. Now we have Oregon country, California, the Gadsden Purchase, and Mexico. So, the Mexican War, when James K. Polk becomes president of the United States, he will basically run for president, basically saying that he promises war to expand America to the Pacific. And Polk was determined that he wanted to get New Mexico and California from Mexico. He had dreams of manifest destiny and dreams of America spreading from the Atlantic to the Pacific. He sent dignitaries down to Mexico to try to buy the Mexican territory, but it didn't succeed. So, as I was saying, U.S. tried to buy the Mexican territory there in Texas, California area, but because Mexico was upset with the United States for accepting Texas as a state, they basically said no. And James K. Polk was eager to have all this land because that was his dream, was to create one United States across the Atlantic to the Pacific. So he provokes war. He has his troops set, and this is where we're going to be doing a DBQ on this one of these days, that he has his, that the Texans believe that the border right there is on the Rio Grande. So what happens is he puts his soldiers, or has the generals put his soldiers on the Mexican side of the Rio Grande, and then when the Mexicans saw this as an act of war, they attack, and this allows James K. Polk to ask Congress for a declaration of war. So what happens is Zachary Taylor, Winfield Scott, and others will go all the way down to Mexico City, the halls of Montezuma, and basically they will take Mexico, and they will take Mexico City. Now here's the thing, because the war was so unpopular, Americans wanted the war to be over, and it was a lot like what happened in Iraq. If you can remember, that it was very easy to basically take Iraq, take Saddam Hussein, but to actually hold Iraq and keep the peace was very, very difficult to do. So what happened is we were bogged down in a guerrilla type of warfare, and that's exactly what happened in Mexico. So the United States wanted to try to get out of the war as quickly as possible, and they realized that Mexican power really, there was no power north of the Rio Grande, and Mexico desperately wanted Americans out of there. So what happens is we will have them sign the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which will officially end the Mexican-American War, which basically has Mexico give up all this red area in here called the Mexican Cession, which was basically half of its land. And basically, in exchange, the United States will give $15 million, which, if you think about it, all this land for the same price as what we paid for the Louisiana Territory. Now, I want to call your attention, this little orange area right here called the Gadsden Purchase, we're going to be talking about that next. We do not buy that yet, but I want you to think right now, why is this piece of land so important for us to buy? Okay. So the Gadsden Purchase in 1853, now remember, this is right before the Civil War. In 1853, we buy the Gadsden Purchase for $10 million. So if you think about it, this whole area of land right here, $15 million, right? 15 million. We bought the Louisiana Territory for $15 million. This right here is 10. Why 10? Well, because if you have Sprint, the cell phone provider, it's Southern Pacific Railroad and Telegraph, okay? And what happened is the guy who will become the president of the Confederacy in less than 7 years, okay, he wants to build a railroad that goes across here to the South, allowing the South to basically improve their economy. But remember, at this time, they were building the Transcontinental Railroad through here, so it was kind of a race. This is where they will bring in camels, which technically once upon a time were indigenous to this area, bringing in camels to get across this area to build the railroad. Unfortunately for this area, the railroad will not actually be built until after the Civil War, because the Civil War will break out in about 7 years after we buy the Gadsden Purchase. But that is the major reason why we bought the Gadsden Purchase. I know a lot of teachers will tell you, hey, it's to make it look nicer, but it really isn't the case. Okay, so the next thing we'll talk about is kind of a quick little review. Remember the Gadsden Purchase. Why do we buy it? The key is Sprint. Southern Pacific Railroad and Telegraph. That is the reason why they wanted to put, basically to connect California with the South, to completely bypass the North, because remember all the economic development in the Transcontinental Railroad that was being built in the North was making the North incredibly wealthy, and this was a sense of being, for the South, being very upset that they keep getting left out in the dark. So that is why the Gadsden Purchase. So the last two things we're going to talk about is the Oregon Territory. Now, westward to the Pacific, remember under the Adams-Onis Treaty, okay? Under the Adams-Onis Treaty, basically Spain will give up all of their land here, okay? All of their land holdings here. Russia will leave because there are no more beaver pelts in hunting. That's pretty much, they've left. So now, above the 5440, this area here in brown is still Russia, but this area here is going to be jointly occupied by the United States and Great Britain. This Oregon country is a huge area, and Americans desperately want to go there because there's amazing farmland. It's the gateway to the east, so even though it's going west. In 1818, you remember the United States and Great Britain are sharing that, and they decide that they're going to jointly occupy this. Mountain men are going to be instrumental in opening up this passageway, not just for trapping beaver, but finding the Oregon Trail and many other different routes for hundreds of thousands of settlers to come over to the Oregon Territory. When beaver is scarce, they worked as guides for the settlers, and within 20 years, Americans are going to outnumber British citizens in this area, and when James K. Polk decides that he wants to become president, he is actually going to run with the rallying cry 5440 or fight, which means that he wanted the United States border all the way up here across to the Atlantic, and if he wasn't going to get it from Britain, then we were going to go to war with Britain again. Now, neither the United States or Great Britain really wants war, so what happens is the United States will actually, and the British will actually pretty much agree to just give up land and to make the northern border with Canada and the United States what it is today, and then whereas Victoria and British Columbia is which is now part of Canada, is where the British would agree to keep their border. So, tens of thousands, like I said, come to America seeking land, a promise for America. And they travel 2,000 miles by covered wagon. Now, a lot of people think the Oregon Trail is one defined trail, like kind of what you see here, okay? One defined trail, and it actually really isn't. There are hundreds of different trails that will traverse the American continent to the American West, okay? And settlers basically, once we reach a critical mass and the settlers want to become part of the United States, James K. Polk is very eager to make sure this is going to happen. And the Americans wanted all of the territory. And because James K. Polk was crazy enough to say, hey, it was one of his presidential campaign promises, 5440 or fight, we're going to go and we're going to fight if you don't give us this land, Britain and the United States will agree to split the Oregon Territory and create the current Canadian and American border that we have today. All right. Last thing that we're going to talk about is basically this area here, California and Utah, the gold rush. Now, once upon a time, when the Spanish came to, and went through California, they named California after a kind of a mythical story named Calafia, okay, which was a land of promise. It was an island that had
basically all this riches, right? And when they sailed to California, because of the coastal mountain ranges, it looked like an island. So they named it California after the mythical story Calafia. And that's how it got its name. The irony is they will never discover the riches that are within California until after they lose it. So James Marshall, he's from Switzerland, okay? James Marshall is from Switzerland, and he gets the same kind of land grant that the Austins get in Texas, that the Mexican government allows American settlers to come in as long as they improve upon the land and pay taxes and abide by the rules. So James Marshall was given this huge land grant, and he begins to build a mill. This is where John Sutter, who is a construction worker, he builds a mill. He's looking for a great place to build a mill, and it's on the American River that he finds that this is where he wants to build a mill. And the reason why he's building a mill is that James Marshall has been advertising in the East that come west, come to California. This is the land of milk and honey. It's the land of plenty. It's the land where dreams come true. And James Sutter was building a mill to provide all the lumber for all this new construction, this housing boom. See, California is no different then than it is now with the housing boom in real estate. So as John Sutter was walking along the American River, he looked down and saw a shiny something in the water. He reached down and out, he pulled out a golden nugget. Okay? Now, he tried to keep it on the down low. And James Marshall and John Sutter tried to keep it on the down low and say, we can't let this get out, because if that happens, it's almost harvest time. Everybody's going to leave the fields, and everybody's going to leave my harvest, and it's going to go basically rotten because everybody's going to look for gold. So they try to keep it on the down low. However, good secrets never remain secrets for long. And within a couple years, 100,000 people will come to California to search for gold. And basically, if you think about it, the state of California will triple in size within 2 years. And basically, California is the only state that will become a state almost instantaneously. They will discover gold in 1849, hence the San Francisco 49ers, and by 1852, it becomes a state. And because the United States wants that gold. So, the gold fields, these boom towns, okay, more than half of the miners were Americans. Others came from South Africa, came from Europe, Asia. Most came by land on the Santa Fe and Oregon trails. Others, if you remember from the Great Horn Spoon from 4th grade, they came around the tip of South America. This is before the Panama Canal was built. And many Californios, which were the Mexicans living in California, had their land stolen, and courts in America basically backed up squatters, which are American settlers that just took the land. And so much of the land that was originally the Californios are just taken from them, and still to this day have never been returned, nor has any legal action been taken to actually give them money for all the land that they had lost, and that's like what happened after World War II with the Japanese. So, with these boom towns, which are unplanned communities, they sprout up overnight, and the most famous one I'd say in California is Bodie, just outside of Mammoth. And because there are very, very few women, there's no law. And this is where the vigilance committees will come out, because there's high crime, drinking, gambling, gun fights, fighting, very little law. Everything costs incredibly a lot of money. So Levi Strauss and others, they basically, those millionaires, the people that make millions in the gold rush are not the miners. They're actually the merchants, the bankers that will make the money in the gold rush, not the actual miners. Abercrombie and Fitch, Levi Strauss, some of the ones that you may know now, they made their money in the gold rush by selling things and mail order catalogs and things like that. Most did not find gold. Most basically went home. And like I said, the merchants were the ones that truly made all the big bucks. Now Utah. You have Joseph Smith, okay? Now Joseph Smith is the founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons. And in Palmyra, New York, he basically gets a vision, okay, from the angels. And Moroni comes down and shows him these golden plates and reveals this lost book found on the North American continent, and creates the and this comes out of, remember, the Second Great Awakening with this type of utopian type of communities. He creates a new religion called the Mormon religion, and based on this book revealed to him by Moroni. Joseph Smith, by 1830, had visions that led him to form this church. He will quickly gain notoriety for both good and bad. A lot of people are drawn to him, but a lot of people do not like him because of this idea of common property, this idea how they're such an insulated community, in that and some of the ideas that don't really jive with the common Christian folk in that area will cause a lot of problems. So he and his group are forced to leave because of polygamy, which is having more than one wife. Now, don't get me wrong. This was in their past. It's not anymore. It's not part of the Mormon faith anymore. So what happens is they are forced to leave, and they go, and because the people did not like the Mormons, they're forced to leave. And so they leave and they go to the Midwest, or right around like Missouri, Illinois area, okay, and they're forced to live there until a vigilante committee basically ambushes, takes and kills Joseph Smith in a gunfight. And when that happens, then his second in command, Brigham Young, is the guy that says, we're going to go to this area called Utah, or what they call Deseret, okay, because they wanted to create this country, this society, and name it Deseret, but that will never happen. Deseret will become known as Utah. But if you ever go to Utah and you read their top-selling newspaper, it's called the Deseret. It's named after that, okay? So the U.S. will eventually gain the Utah Territory, but if you look at the Utah Territory, it shrunk severely in size. The Utah Territory once held Nevada, but Nevada will break off and create its own state until you only have a small fraction, what is now Utah, as part of the United States, and that will not happen until after the Civil War. So that concludes the lecture. I will give you guys the map today in class, or whenever I give it to you in class, whenever you're listening to this, and maybe today, maybe not, when you're listening to this, the same day I gave the lecture, the note guides. But what I want you to do is go through, listen to this lecture, write down all the information in the sections, answer the questions. Every day we will go over a small little section as a review question, talk about it, and I will stamp different parts of your map to make sure that you are doing what you need to get done. Meanwhile, as we're doing this, we will have a couple activities on Manifest Destiny, as well as a digital scrapbook of Manifest Destiny that you will have to complete for this. At the end of the week, there will be a Manifest Destiny test, and it's about 20 questions, each question worth 2 points each, equaling 40 points. So I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Look forward to another one coming soon, and please make sure you listen to this lecture as often as you can so that it sinks in, and more than once is always better. Okay, thank you guys very much.